Hello and welcome to today's installment of the Daf, Chullin 73 in the Steinsaltz edition, and I'm going to dive straight in. So it's not 73, it's 74. In fact, such limbs and flesh are not prohibited by Torah law, as the slaughter does not render them as though they'd already fallen off prior to the slaughter, and the verse cited by the Braita is not a true derivation but a mere support. Accordingly, with regard to them, there is nothing other than a rabbinic mitzvah to separate oneself from consuming them. So the footnote here says, Ela behen ela mitzvah poros bilvad. Now, the rabbinic decree enacted as a safeguard for the prohibition against eating a limb from a living animal, and the verse cited by the Braita as a source for this prohibition serves as a mere support for the halacha, says Rashi. Rashi on Karita 21b explains that the expression mitzvah to separate indicates that it is not a full-fledged prohibition, but a mitzvah to abstain from eating these food. See the Tosfos there. From the Rambam, it appears that the Gemara is in fact referring to a Torah prohibition, but it is less severe in that one is not flogged for its violation. As can be understood from Rav's later comment. In this regard, it is similar to the consumption of half a measure of a prohibited substance, which is prohibited by Torah law but not punishable with lashes. See the Maggid Mishnah on Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Makalot Asurat 5:11. The other footnote, with regard to limbs or flesh hanging from an animal, if they cannot be healed, they are prohibited for consumption, even if they were not fully separated from the animal before its slaughter. One is not flogged for eating them in accordance with the Braita and the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, as indicated by the statement of Rav Yosef citing Rav. Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Makalot Asurat 5:6 Shulchan Aruch Yodeya 62:3. Rav Yosef sat before Rav Huna, and he sat and said, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, if one ate this hanging limb, he is flogged for violating the prohibition against eating a limb from a living animal. One of the sages said to him, do not listen to a statement in the name of Rav, as this is what Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta says in the name of Rav. If one ate this hanging limb, he is not flogged. Rav Huna said to Rav Yosef, upon whose version of Rav's ruling shall we rely? Rav Yosef turned his face away in anger and said to him, what is the difficulty? When I said in Rav's name that one is flogged for eating a limb that had been hanging from an animal when it died, I was referring to a case of death. Ki amore ana b'misa. If an animal dies without being slaughtered, one is flogged for eating any part of it. When she explains that Rav mentions the punishment of lashes with regard to the consumption of a hanging limb to illustrate that lashes in this case are given only if the person was forewarned with regard to the prohibition against eating a limb from a living animal, but if he was forewarned only about the prohibition of a carcass, he is not flogged by means other than slaughter, which renders the limb as though it had already fallen. What does that mean? The meter de osim nipol, with regard to limbs or flesh that are hanging from an animal and that cannot be healed. If the animal died without being slaughtered, the hanging limb and flesh are considered to have fallen off before the slaughter, while the animal was still alive. Consequently, if one consumed them, he is flogged, violating the prohibition against consuming a limb from a living animal, as stated by Rav Yosef. And that's from the Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Makalot Asurat 5:60, the Maggid Mishnah there, of prior to the animal's death. When Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta said in the name of Rav that one is not flogged, he was referring to the case of a slaughter, which does not render the limb as though it had already fallen off prior to the slaughter, and therefore serves to render the limb permitted for consumption. Rav said, from where is this matter that the sages stated derived? The death of an animal by means other than slaughter renders a hanging limb as though it had already fallen off prior to the slaughter, whereas the slaughter of the animal does not render a limb as though it had already fallen off, as is written with regard to the 8 species of impure creeping animals, and anything that these fall upon when they are dead, it shall be impure. Leviticus 11:32. What is the term when they are dead so to exclude? If we say so to exclude the time when they are alive, that principle is derived from everything upon which any part of their carcass falls shall be impure in Leviticus 11:35, which explicitly states that only the carcasses impart impurity. Rather, learn from the verse that death renders a hanging limb as though it had already fallen off, and slaughter does not render a hanging limb as though it had already fallen off. Rav Ada bar Ahava said to Rava, but this verse is written with regard to creeping animals, which do not require slaughter. How can Allah with regard to slaughter be derived from here. I said to him, if because it is superfluous, this verse is not referring to the matter of keeping animals, in Eino Inyan, this form of reasoning is one of the 32 homiletical principles of Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Yossi. According to most commentaries, the conclusion drawn from these principles are as authoritative as they would be if they were written explicitly in the Torah. See Yad Malachi. This principle is based on the superfluity of a verse in the context in which they are written. Nevertheless, the superfluous is never understood as applying to matters totally unrelated to the meaning of the text. Creeping animals, which are not subject to requirement of slaughter, apply to the matter of an animal which is subject to slaughter. The Gemara objects, but the phrase "when they are dead, it shall be impure" is still necessary to teach a different halacha, i.e., that they impart impurity only when they are still in a state similar to the state at the time of death, i.e., if they are moist, they impart impurity, whereas if they are dry, they do not impart impurity. So the footnote here, with regard to flesh of a creeping animal that has dried until it is like earthenware, it could return to its former state by being soaked in lukewarm water for 24 hours. It still imparts impurity, but if not, it is pure. That's from the Ram Sefer Tahara Hilchet Tumat 412. The Mark explains when they are dead is written twice, once in the verse and once in the previous verse, which states, "Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be impure until the evening," in Leviticus 11:31. The Gemara returns to the dispute in the Mishnah 72a with regard to a fetus that extends its foreleg and then its mother was slaughtered. Rabbi Meir holds that the foreleg is regarded as a carcass with the associated impurity, while the rabbis hold that although it is not permitted for consumption, the slaughter prevents it from having the impurity of a carcass. With regard to this dispute, Rav Hissa said, the dispute concerns only a limb of a fetus that was alive when the mother was slaughtered, but concerning the case of a limb of a fetus that was dead, Aver the Ubad Mace. If a fetus extended its foreleg outside the womb and the foreleg was not severed from the rest of the fetus until after the mother was slaughtered, and one who eats that foreleg is not flogged for eating a limb from a living animal, the halacha applied even if the fetus was found dead. And according to the Rabbi's explanation, that the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Meir even with regard to a dead fetus, as they claim that the slaughter of the mother does not render the limb as though it had already fallen off prior to the mother's death. The commentaries note that it is nevertheless prohibited to eat the foreleg due to prohibition against eating meat that has left its boundary, as explained on 68b. And that's from the Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Machanot Surat 590, the Ravid and the Magen Mishnah there, and 511. When the mother was slaughtered, everyone agrees that slaughter renders the fetus's limb as though it had already fallen off. The expression slaughter renders it fallen off when it appears with regard to a foreleg extended by a fetus does not have the same meaning as with regard to a hanging limb. The original use of the phrase with regard to a hanging limb means that the limb is viewed as though it had become detached from the body of the animal while it was still alive. When it is used in reference to an extended limb, it simply means that it is not included in the mother's slaughter. Since with regard to a fetus, the issue is whether or not the fetus was included in the mother's slaughter, it is only relevant in a case where the fetus was found alive. If the fetus was dead, it is clear that the slaughter of the mother did not affect the limb, and it imparts impurity as a carcass. This is because the dead fetus is not a category of animal to which this Torah applies the concept of slaughter, and therefore the slaughter of the mother cannot be applied to it. Applied to the slaughter, and it imparts impurity just as a limb from a living animal. But Rabbi said, just as there's a dispute between Rabbi and the rabbis concerning this case, where the fetus was alive, so too there's a dispute between them concerning that case where the fetus died. Since the fetus is permitted through the slaughter of its mother, it does not matter whether it is alive or dead. According to the explanation, Rabbi Meir states in the Mishnah, the flesh is richly impure due to having been in contact with the carcass. It is because the foreleg is actually considered to be a carcass. According to the opinion of Rav Hista, that the Mishnah is referring to a live fetus, Rabbi Meir maintains that the foreleg is actually a limb of a living animal, and the Mishnah's intention is that it imparts impurity like a carcass. The Mishnah states that an 8-month-old fetus that was born alive is not rendered richly pure by slaughtering it. The reason given is that the concept of permitting an animal through slaughter is never stated with regard to that kind of animal. The Gemara challenges, but isn't it taught in a Braita in a discussion about whether the slaughterer renders a treifa pure from the impurity of a carcass? An 8-month-old fetus that was born alive will prove the point, as even though there are other animals of that kind that are permitted through slaughter, its slaughter does not render it pure from having the impurity of a carcass. This refutes the claim that the issue of slaughter rendering an animal pure from having the impurity of a carcass is a function of whether or not the concept of slaughter applies to that kind of animal. Rav Kahana said, the Tana of the Braita hold that even with regard to an 8-month-old fetus, it can be said that there are animals of that kind that are permitted through slaughter, i.e. when they are still inside the womb and the mother is slaughtered, such an animal is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of its mother. Therefore, he cites the case of an 8-month-old fetus as a refutation. But the Tana of Mishnah holds that the fact that this kind of animal is permitted by virtue of slaughter of its mother does not define it as a kind of animal concerning which there is a concept of slaughter, and therefore he holds that this case cannot be used as a refutation. The Gemara asks, and according to that Tana of the Braita, who does not use it as a refutation, from where does he derive that the slaughter of a treifa renders it pure? According to this Tana, the fact that there are animals of that kind that are permitted to slaughter is not a sufficient reason for the slaughter to render the animal pure. Therefore, the previous claim of the Mishnah remains in force. Just as a non-kosher animal is prohibited for consumption and the slaughter does not render it pure, so too the slaughter of a treifa should not render it pure, says Rashi. From having the impurity of a carcass, the Gemara answers that he derives it from that which Rav Yehuda says that Rav says. As Rav Yehuda says that Rav says, and some say it was taught in a Braita, the verse states, and if some domesticated animal of which you may eat dies, one who touches the carcass shall be impure until the evening, Leviticus 11:39, and the word some teaches that only some dead animals impart impurity as a carcass, but some dead animals do not impart impurity as a carcass. And what is it that does not impart impurity? That is a treifa that one slaughtered. The verse, and some domesticated animal of which you may eat dies, can be interpreted as also referring to a treifa, as an animal that is a treifa cannot survive. See 42a. Rav Hoshaya raises a dilemma. If one inserted his hand inside the womb of an animal, if one slaughtered a fetus while it was inside the womb, the slaughter is ineffective and the fetus is prohibited for consumption. As explained by the Ran, the halacha is stringent because the Gemara's dilemma concerning this case is left unresolved. Shulchan Aruch Yoredeah 14:6 and the comment of the Ramah. And slaughter a 9-month-old fetus that was alive, what is the halacha? Does the slaughter performed inside the mother render the fetus is permitted? The Gemara notes this dilemma may be raised according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and it may be raised according to the opinion of the Rabbi. The Gemara elaborates. It may be raised according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir. It is possible that Rabbi Meir states in the Mishnah that a 9-month-old ben Pekua requires slaughter, and slaughter renders the animal permitted only in that case, because that statement may apply only in a case where the animal emerged into the airspace of the world, i.e. was born alive. But if it is still inside its mother, its slaughter does not render it permitted. Or perhaps even the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Meir maintain that a 9-month-old ben Bekor is permitted by virtue of his mother's slaughter, would concede that the slaughter of the fetus itself also permits it. But perhaps with regard to such animal, the murder one considers 4 simonim, either the windpipe and the gullet of the mother, and the windpipe and the gullet of the fetus, to be fit for slaughter, and the fetus is permitted by the cutting of either pair. Hananya said, come and have a resolution of this dilemma from the Mishnah 72b, and it considers an animal that was born as a treifa from the womb as one that never had a period of potential fitness. But if it is so that one can slaughter a fetus in its mother's womb, you may find that actually it did have a period of potential fitness, as if one wants to, he can insert his hand into the womb and slaughter it before it develops into treifa. Rabbi said to Rabbi Hananya, teach that Mishnah as referring to a case where the fetus was formed as a treifa from its outset while inside the womb, and you will find a case where a fetus has 5 legs. This animal is a treifa in accordance with the principle of having an extra limb is tantamount to having a limb removed, which would render an animal a treifa. See 58b, which certainly developed from the outset. Consequently, there was never a possibility of slaughtering it. The Mishnah: in the case of one who slaughtered an animal, if one slaughtered an animal and found it inside an 8-month-old fetus, whether it was alive or dead, or a dead 9-month-old fetus, and it does not require slaughter. In the case of a live 9-month-old fetus, after emerging from the womb, it stands upon the ground by a rabbinic decree. It requires slaughter. This decree was enacted lest people who see that animal being eaten without its own slaughter mistakenly permit other animals that have not yet been slaughtered. Nevertheless, as long as it did not yet stand upon the ground, it is permitted to eat it, and it was permitted through the slaughter of the mother. This ruling is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis explained by Rav Kahana on 75b, on the Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Machal Atasurit 5:14, Yodeh 13:2, and found within it an 8-month-old fetus, i.e. one that was not full term, whether it was alive or dead, or a 9-month-old fetus, i.e. one that was full term, that was dead. An 8-month-old fetus is one whose term of gestation has not been completed, and the mention of 8 months refers to the standard example of a cow, which has a full-term pregnancy of 9 months like humans do, although with regard to other animals, the full-term pregnancy is different, i.e. 5 months in the case of a sheep. A fetus whose gestation has not yet been completed is not considered an animal in its own right, but a limb of the mother. Consequently, it is permitted through its mother's slaughter, as derived from the verse, and every animal that has a split hoof and has hoofs wholly cloven in two, and chews the cud in the animals, it may eat. You may eat. Deuteronomy 14:6. Which, as the Gemara in 69a explains, teaches that an animal within another animal, i.e. a fetus, is permitted for consumption through the slaughter of the mother, with the exception of its blood and forbidden fats, which are specifically prohibited by the Torah. That fetus is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of its mother, as is considered part of its mother. Therefore, its blood is considered part of its mother's blood, and it is prohibited. So, one must tear the fetus and remove its blood before it may be consumed. If he found within it a live 9-month-old fetus, it requires its own slaughter. And the main reason is that the Torah permitted a fetus through the slaughter of his mother only when the fetus itself cannot be slaughtered. A 9-month-old fetus is viable and can be permitted through its own slaughter, i.e. e.g. in a case where the mother died without a slaughter. Therefore, Rabbi Meir claims its mother's slaughter cannot render it permitted, as it is considered as an independent full-fledged animal, and if one slaughters both the mother and the fetus on the same day, one is liable for violating the prohibition against slaughtering an animal itself and its offspring on the same day. It is prohibited to slaughter a mother and her offspring on the same day, as is stated, and whether it is a cow or an ewe, you shall not kill it, and its young both on one day. Leviticus 22:28. If one slaughtered an animal and found inside it a live 9-month-old fetus, and then stood upon the ground, he may not slaughter it on the same day as the slaughter of the mother. Nevertheless, if he slaughtered it, he is not flogged. This is because the requirement to slaughter the offspring is only a rabbinic decree. This ruling is according to the opinion of the rabbis, as explained on 75b, Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Shechita 12:10. The statement of Rabbi Meir. The rabbis say even when the fetus is 9 months old, it is still considered part of its mother, and the slaughter of its mother renders it permitted for consumption. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri says, even if the fetus emerged alive and is now 5 years old and ploughing in the field, and the earlier slaughter of its mother rendered it permitted, and does not require a slaughter before it is eaten. But if one tore an animal, i.e. he killed it without slaughtering it, and inside it he found a live 9-month-old fetus, Karao Matzah Ben Tisha Chai, a 9-month-old fetus found alive inside an animal that was not slaughtered can be permitted for consumption if it, i.e. the offspring, is slaughtered. If the offspring was less than 9 months old, it is prohibited, and even slaughtering it will not render it permitted. The Ramah, citing the Smag, said that nowadays no offspring found inside an unslaughtered animal is permitted, due to consider that it is not yet 9 months old. That's in the Rambam Sefer Kedusha Hilchot Machal Atasurit 5:15, Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 13:3. Everyone agreed that the fetus required its own slaughter because his mother was not slaughtered. Rabbi Lazar says that Rabbi Shai says the sages discussed the permissibility of a live 9-month-old fetus found inside a slaughtered animal only. Rashi explains that the reference is to the lenient ruling of the rabbis to permit the offspring, which is limited specifically to the question of whether or not it requires slaughter. With regard to other relevant prohibitions, they concede that it is considered a full-fledged animal. Others explain the Gemara in the opposite manner. Rabbi Meir is stringent and rules that the offspring has the status of a separate animal only with regard to slaughter. With regard to other issues, it is not considered a full-fledged animal, and the relevant prohibitions do not apply to it. And that's from the Rebbeinu Gershom or Hagolah. With regard to the matter of whether it requires a certain slaughter, the Gemara asks, but what does Rabbi Oshaya's statement serve to exclude? Rabbi Oshaya's statement indicates that with regard to other matters, all agree that it is considered an independent animal with the associated prohibitions. The Gemara suggests it serves to exclude its fat, i.e. the fats that are prohibited in a regular animal, such as the fat of the kidneys and the innards, and the sciatic nerve. The Gemara asks, the fat of which part? If we say it is referring to the fat of the fetus, that is difficult because the sages disagree as to whether or not it is permitted, as it is taught in the Braita. The prohibition of the sciatic nerve applies to a fetus, and its fat is prohibited. This statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says the prohibition of sciatic nerve does not apply to a fetus, and fat is permitted. So what does the footnote say? If one slaughters an animal and finds an 8 or 9 month old fetus inside it, his fat and sciatic nerve are permitted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. This lenient ruling applies only if fetuses that did not stand upon the ground, but if it stood upon the ground, the fat and sciatic nerve are prohibited, as stated on 75b. Some say that if the fetus was 9 months old and alive, its fat is prohibited even if it did not stand upon the ground, and one is punished with kite for its consumption. Furthermore, in such a case, one must also remove all strands and membranes of fat that are prohibited in other animals. This ruling is in accordance with the ruling of Rabbi Meir, as Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi formulated an unattributed Mishnah in accordance with on 89b, Rama Sefer Kedusha, Hilchot Machalat Asurat, 7.3, Shulchan Aruch Yodea 64.2, 65.7, and see the Shach there. And Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Shai says this is still considered a live 9-month-old fetus. Rabbi Meir follows his standard line of reasoning, which he expressed in the Mishnah, that such a fetus is considered an independent, full-fledged animal. And Rabbi Yehuda follows his standard line of reasoning, as expressed by the rabbis in the Mishnah, that such a fetus is considered part of its mother. Rather, say that Rabbi Elazar is referring to the fat of the sciatic nerve. By Torah law, certain fats of a kosher animal are prohibited for consumption, specifically those that are sacrificed upon the altar, including fats that are covered with a membrane that can be easily peeled off. See 49b. The fats attached to the sciatic nerve are not prohibited by Torah law, but by rabbinic law, 92b. Some claim that the sages prohibited the fats as a prohibition ancillary to that of the sciatic nerve, while others contend that they are prohibited as an extension of the Torah prohibition against consuming forbidden fats. See 92b. As is told in a Braita, with regard to sciatic nerve, one scrapes around it to remove it entirely in any place that it is found in the thigh. If one cuts out its fat completely, even those fats that are sunk into the flesh, this is statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, one cuts out the nerve and the fat that is the level of the flesh of the thigh, but they are not obligated to remove all traces of fat. Rather, Rabbi Shai's statement was stated. It was stated like this. Rabbi Elazar says that Rabbi Shai says, the sages discussed the permissibility of the fetus only with regard to massive consumption, i.e. whether or not it must be slaughtered in order to permit its flesh, and whether or not the fat and the sciatic nerve are permitted. This statement serves to exclude only one who copulates with the animal, one who plows it, Rashi explains that although the rabbis claim that the fetus is not considered a full-fledged animal with regard to consumption, they agree that with regard to the other prohibition it is. The opposite explanation is suggested by Rebbeinu Gershom or Hagolah. In his opinion, the distinction is drawn in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who holds that the fetus is like a full-fledged animal only with regard to consumption. With regard to other prohibitions, it is not. Rabbi Shai refers to the prohibition of Roveo. The simple understanding is that this is a prohibition against copulating with an animal. Some commentators explain that the term Roveo refers to the prohibition against breeding diverse kinds of animals. You shall not let an animal mate, albeit with a diverse kind, because 1919, other than animal different species, as everyone agrees that these prohibitions apply to a fetus, just as they do to any other animal. A related Amoraic dispute is cited concerning a live month-old fetus found inside a slaughtered animal. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, according to the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, who permits the fat, he also permits its blood. According to the statement of Rabbi Meir, who prohibits its fat, he also prohibits its blood. And Rabbi Yochanan said, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who permits its fat, he prohibits its blood. The blood of a fetus is prohibited like the blood of the mother, and one who eats it is liable to receive kaveh. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and even Rabbi Yehuda, who permits its fat, prohibits its blood. See the Rambam, Sefer Kedusha, Yochad Machalat Suad, 6.5, Shulchan Daf, 66.1. The only commentator suggests the following rationale for this distinction: the fat of a fetus is permitted by Torah law as derived from the verse, and every animal in the animals that you may eat, Deuteronomy 14:6, which indicates that anything inside a slaughtered animal is permitted for consumption, as explained previously in 69a. By contrast, the blood of a fetus is prohibited as it is commonly mingled with its mother's blood, Seva ha'eshkol the Rosh. Therefore, the blood of the fetus must be treated like the blood of the mother's limbs, which is certainly prohibited. See Rashi here and on Mishnah. Other commentaries suggest that this verse, which states that you may eat, applies only to substances that are eaten, e.g. fats, but not to blood, which is drunk. Written around Rabbi Akiva Eger and the Chasam Sofer on the Mishnah others explain the difference between fats and blood as follows. The fetus therefore is not viewed as a separate animal as part of its mother. With regard to fats, not all of the animal's fats is prohibited, rather only certain specific fats are. Therefore, the fats of the fetus are permitted since they do not lie in a specific part of the mother where the fats are prohibited. By contrast, all the blood of the mother is prohibited, and therefore the blood of the fetus is automatically included in this prohibition. Maras Hayut. Rabbi Yochanan raised an objection to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish from the Mishnah, which states, with regard to an 8-month-old fetus, whether alive or a dead 9-month-old fetus found inside a slaughtered animal, that since it is considered part of the mother, its blood is prohibited. Therefore, one must tear the fetus and remove its blood before it may be consumed. The Mishnah prohibits the blood, but apparently permits the rest of the fetus, including its fat, which contradicts the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. In resolution of this difficulty, Rabbi Zeva said, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish meant to say that the consumption of the blood lost as the fetus is not punishable by excision from the water come the kaveh, whereas Rabbi Yochanan holds that it is. The Gemara clarifies, according to whom did Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish state that one who permits the fat of a fetus also holds that the consumption of its blood is not punishable by kaveh, since it is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who permits its fat. But that is difficult because the blood should be regarded only as a blood to exudate. So what's the footnote here? Dama tamsis. Although one is not liable to kaveh for consuming the blood of exudate, one who consumes an olive bulb is flogged. The halakha in accordance with the opinion of the rabbi should dispute the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. I blew that excuse from the neck of the animal after the initial spurt of its slaughter concludes. The blood did not spurt out during the slaughter of its mother. Rabbi Yehuda holds that consumption of even this blood is punishable by kaveh, as it is taught in a Braita. The consumption of blood of exudate is prohibited by a regular prohibition and punishable with lashes. Unlike the initial spurt of blood known as the blood of the soul, consumption is punished by kaveh. Rabbi Yehuda says blood of exudate is also punishable by kaveh. I'm going to finish there. I've not quite finished the Omid. I wish you a good day and peace to all of Israel. All the best. Bye.